To make the apple pie, I have 250 grams of plain flour in my bowl, and as this is short crust pastry, I've got 125 grams of fat here. For short crust pastry, we always use half the amount of fat to flour, and I'm just chopping this up into slightly smaller pieces to make it easier to rub in. There is a mixture of margarine and white vegetable fat here. You can use lard, but we use margarine or butter to help give the pastry flavour and colour, and we use the white vegetable fat. It doesn't add any flavour to the pastry, but it does help with the shortness. And this is short crust pastry, so it needs to be short. And in terms of pastry making and biscuits, the word short just means crumbly. So to help make a crumbly pastry, which is not hard, a mixture of both fats. So just chop them up roughly. They do not need to be in exact size pieces. We don't want to spend too long on this because they're going to be rubbed into the flour anyway. Chop them up roughly, coat them in the flour, and then use your fingertips to rub this in until the mixture looks like breadcrumbs. It's your fingertips only. The palms of your hands are hotter than your fingertips. If I just put one hand in my bowl, you use your hand like a scoop, pick up some flour, some fat, and you rub your thumbs over your fingertips, trying not to get fat and flour onto the palm of your hand where it's hotter. Now, you can do this with both hands, and you need to move the mixture around your bowl. If you just rub in the same place, you'll find that you have white flour at the edges of your bowl. And to turn this bowl, I'm just keeping my hands on the inside, pressing and moving. So you just rub the fat into the flour until you can't tell, or you can't see any more large lumps of fats. This is nowhere near ready yet, but if you're not sure if you've got large lumps of fat in there, if you shake your bowl, all the large lumps of fat should come up to the top. The fat's rubbed into the flour, and if I shake my bowl, a few lumps come to the top, but that's where the mixture is starting to stick together, not where I have large lumps of fat left. So now it's time to add the water. 10 teaspoons of water for 250 grams of flour. So I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3 tablespoons, which is the equivalent of 10 teaspoons, and add 1 teaspoonful as well. Sorry, 3 tablespoons is the equivalent of 9 teaspoons, and 1 teaspoon will make 10. Stir that with your knife. And if you wanted to measure your water in a measuring jug, 10 teaspoons is 50 mils. So stir that up with a knife. You can see it's starting to stick together in lumps. So it's starting to go together in lumps. I'm just going to wipe the knife off, put my hands in and see if I can squeeze this together. This is one of the occasions where you've got to use your own judgment. So I can feel this mixture is still quite wet in the middle, and when I'm saying I'm squeezing it together, I am actually squeezing through my hands so that the mixture in the middle here is being moved to the outside. If you just pat this around like that, it's not going to actually form into a nice even dough. So 10 teaspoons of water seems to have been enough on here. There we go, and I've got one ball of dough, a clean bowl, ready to roll out. So my ball of dough goes onto my worktop, and I'm going to just knead it lightly make sure that it's staying together, and that is then ready for rolling. Just going to wash my hands. I've got a large and a small pie tin. If you've got, this is an individual one, if you are doing this as your exam, you might prefer to do this in individual pie tins. This is a 18cm sandwich tin, which I'm going to use to cook my apple pie in. And because it's a pie, I need a top and a bottom. So I'm going to cut the pastry into 2/3 and 1/3. The 2/3 for the top, the 1/3 for the bottom. So as I'm now going to be rolling, flour your worktop, put your pastry down and just press it flat to start with. My sandwich tin is a circle, so if my pastry is a circle to start off with, I stand a chance of it being a circle when I've finished. A little bit of flour on the top, rolling pin, roll once away from you and give your pastry a small turn. And if you only roll away from you and keep turning your pastry every time you have rolled, you will feel as soon as it starts to stick, and you can put more flour underneath so your pastry should not stick to your worktop. If I can't move it easily, I will add a little bit more flour underneath, and I'm just going to put a tiny little bit on the top. So once away from you and turn, and you can see I have a little bit of cracking at the edges, but it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to keep rolling my pastry until it is big enough to do the bottom and sides of my tin. And the way that you tell, you put your tin the right way up on there, and you need enough. This is sort of 1.5 cm deep, so I need enough. I need to see enough pastry all the way round to know that I have enough to come up the sides of my tin and over the lip. So once more, you have a choice of how you move your pastry into your tin. So lots of people will put their rolling pin in the middle of the pastry, fold this over, move the tin closer, and then holding your pastry onto your rolling pin, you can unroll that into the tin, and it's done. Now this bit is important. You can see when I've put the pastry into the tin, the edges are sloping down. As you roll pastry out, you stretch it. So once you've got this onto your tin, the first thing you need to do is just lift the pastry edges and gently push your pastry into the bottom of the tin so that you are not stretching it anymore. Here where it's curved, if I was to just push that down, I'd be stretching the pastry even more and likely to make holes in it. So make sure that it is down towards the bottom of the tin all the way around, and then you can fold the pastry over like that. And I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to worry about trimming the pastry edge because I need to damp that to be able to stick the lid. So I'm going to leave that as it is, put that to one side, and roll my second piece of pastry for the lid. So same thing, I need a round, so roll once, small turn, once away from you, and a small turn each time. And I'm just going to put a little bit of flour on the top of that. And this needs to be big enough to cover the top of your tin. So again, it's just a little bit of flour on the top. You can use the tin as your measure. If you don't want to use the tin as your measure, you can use your rolling pin. Put your rolling pin on top of your tin, work out how big it's got to be, and then use your rolling pin as a measure. But really, very often it is easier to just bring the tin back, put it on top of your pastry again. And if you can see a little margin all the way round, that's fine. And for the moment, I'm just going to pick my second lot of pastry up, put it on top of the tin. I think that could be just a little bit bigger, and then I'll leave that to one side while I do the apple filling. To make the filling for my pie, I've got 500 grams of Bramley apples. Any cooking apple will do, they don't have to be Bramleys. Bramleys seem to be about the only cooking apple that you can buy in the shops at the moment, but you need to peel them first. Having peeled both of my apples onto the plate that had the fat on, now need to get rid of the core, and there's two ways of doing this. It really doesn't matter which way you do. You can cut your apples into quarters and then with a sharp knife carefully cut the core out, so you can see where the core is and you can cut the core out of the middle. Some people are concerned about cutting towards their hands, and if I turn this way it's slightly awkward to do, so some people will put the apple on the board, and I can't finish it that way, but you cut diagonally and take the apple core out. And if you are really concerned about cutting down towards your hands, what you can do does make more waste this way, but you can cut straight down there and basically take quite thick slices of apple away from the core, so you leave yourself with a square chunk of core like that, but you have apple that you can then slice. How you get the core out of your apple is up to you, but we want some nice reasonably thin slices to go and be cooked. Okay, my apples are all sliced and in my saucepan, and I'm just going to cook them for a little bit before they go into the pie. You can, if you wish and you've got more time, cook them completely in the pie, but I prefer to have them a little bit cooked first of all. So I'm just going to add 1, 2, 3 tablespoons of water. If I need to add a little bit more in a minute I will, but quite a lot of juice will come out of the apples, and I'm just going to put these over a gentle heat, and I want to see a change in colour. I just want to see that the very outside of the apples is starting to cook. They will continue to cook in the oven as part of the pie, but I just want to start them cooking before I put them in the pastry. The apples have been cooking for about 5 minutes. They've softened a little bit, they haven't gone to mush, there isn't loads of liquid in there. More juice will come out and will come out in a moment. And I just need to add some sugar. One of the advantages of cooking the apples a little bit first is you can then put some sugar in, and I'm putting 50 grams of sugar, which is roughly 2 tablespoons in there, and I'm just going to give it a stir. But it's one of the advantages of cooking the apples first is you can then taste and adjust and see if that is going to be sweet enough. Now obviously I've still got whole pieces of apple in there, but I don't know if you can see, putting the sugar in has actually made a little bit more juice. So all I need now is a teaspoon to just try a bit of the cooked apple and see if it is sweet enough. So I don't want loads of it. And for me, that's absolutely fine. Remember, no double dipping if you need to put a little bit more sugar in. I'm just going to add a little bit of mixed spice because I just fancy a bit of mixed spice in the apple pie today. You do not have to put mixed spice in. You could put cinnamon or cloves in if you wish to, but I'm just going to stir up a little tiny bit of mixed spice. You can leave the apple plain, and at this stage, if you had something like fresh or frozen blackberries and you wanted to make an apple and blackberry pie, now is when you would add those. So I have my pastry case on a baking tray. I've just lifted the lid. Please remember to lift the lid off your pastry, and I'm going to just put the apples inside. So there we go. 500 grams of apples inside my pastry case, and the last thing I need to do before I put the lid on is brush the edge with water. If you remember, I said we would leave this edge on, and I'm just brushing it with a little bit of the water out of that jug. That jug of water has been fine. I've used it for the pastry, I've used it for cooking the apples, and now I'm going to use it to glaze my pie. Pick your lid up, put it on top of your apples, and then carefully just pinch the edges together. So really carefully just work your way around, pinch the edges of your pie together, and then I'm just going to hold this up and cut against the edge of the dish to just trim off the extra pastry. So I need all the pastry that is extra trimmed away from the edge of that dish. And because we've put a warm filling in this pastry, do need to work quite quickly. You can use a fork or your fingers to just make a pattern around the edge of your pastry. Not only does that look nice, but it also helps to seal the edges of your pastry and prevent them from opening up. So blade of a knife or a fork. If at this point the pastry starts to move in a little bit from the edge, that's absolutely fine, but your pie will look better if you've got a nicely sealed edge. And then again, with my pastry brush, I'm just going to very quickly, because the heat from the apples will be starting to melt this pastry, brush the top of this pie just with water, and then sprinkle a little bit of sugar on the top. And as the water heats up in the oven, the sugar should melt in the water anyway, but it'll melt a bit quicker in the oven. And then as it continues to cook, you should get a nice brown top, a nice sugary top to your apple pie. And the last thing to do before it goes into the oven, make a couple of slits in the top to allow steam to escape. So on the baking tray, this is going into a hot oven, 200 degrees, gas mark 6, for between 20 and 30 minutes until the pastry around the edge and over the top is nice and brown and dried out. The apple pie's been in the oven for 20 minutes and it's cooked. If I tip it up, you can see that the pastry is nicely golden brown, it's dry, there are no wet patches on it, and where the sugar has melted into the water, we have a nice crisp top to that pie.